to offer, not only to us, but also to the entire world. So thank you for that. I also want to take this opportunity to thank ISJS, Panditji, as well as Shuganji and yourself, Pratnyaji, for giving me an opportunity to be part of this session and also speak with and be part of this esteemed scholars that you have on. So thank you for that. So with all the acknowledgements out of the way, Panditji, do I have a chance to share my screen? Can I do that?
Yes, you can do.
Okay. And if people are getting admitted, do I have to approve them, or can they just join on their own, right? Without
I will do that. Don't worry about that. I will add.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. So let's go through this, and I will share my screen with you, and hopefully you can see it. Let me see. Okay. Can you see the screen that I've shared?
Yes.
And is it visible to everyone?
Yes, even I can see it.
Okay. Wonderful. I'm going to put this in the presentation mode. Hopefully that will improve the visibility a little bit more.
You will have to enable editing for that, I guess.
So I'll just put it in the slideshow mode. Okay. Is this better?
Yes.
Yes, looks great.
Okay, so let's get started with this very important topic in Jain Dharma, and often a little bit complex to understand because Jaina theory of knowledge from that perspective is quite complex. But I have tried my best to make this a little bit more generic and make this a little bit more understanding in terms of the concepts that are presented. So going through this, we are going to talk a little bit about overall context. Then we will dive into why Anekantvad, or the multiplicity of views, is important. And then we will talk about the doctrine of Syadvada, and then the understanding of Nayas and Pramanas, right? And then the role of Nayas as they come. And then the overall overview of Nayas, a very high level overview in terms of what Nayas look like. So let me Can you see the presentation?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. From the perspective of the context setting, I thought we talk about Jain epistemology from a very high level perspective in terms of what it consists of. Many people know that our agamas are divided into four anuyogas, four categories. But if we try to look at it from a different perspective, what we find is, first of all, there are five components. The first component is the component of Jain Darshana. And darshan is a word that is used in the Indian subcontinent to denote a school of thought, a school of philosophy, a school of religion, right? So we have Buddha darshan, we have Jain darshan, we have Vedic darshan, right? So Jain darshan means basically Jain vichar, Jain ideology, Jain thought process that engulfs all parts and all kinds of philosophies that are part of it. So this refers to Jain vichar. Then there is Jain dharma itself, right? And while we understand Jain dharma in the normal parlance as religion, Here, what we mean from the perspective of Agama, Jain Dharma denotes here the Achar Paddhati. Achar Paddhati meaning the conduct part of Jain religion, Jain Dharma, that is really what is referred as Dharma here, Jain Dharma. And that is by and large uh, bifurcated or divided into ascetics life, which is the Muni Dharma, and as well as the lay person's Dharma or the Shravak Dharma. So this, while the first one talks about Vichar, the second one talks about Achar, which is the conduct. After that comes the Jain Siddhanta, right? And Jain Siddhanta, as in the systematized body of knowledge within Jainism that has principles, rules, theories that are universal in nature. So that is what we mean by Jain Siddhant. And broadly speaking, Jain Siddhant is bifurcated into Jiva Siddhant and Karma Siddhant. So I'm sure that people are aware with these terms, what is a Jiva Siddhant is and what is a Karma Siddhant is. So that is what we mean by Jain Siddhant. The next part of epistemology is Jain Nyaya, right? So this is an area which is not explored as much as the other aspects of the Jain Dharma are, but Jain Nyaya very much is a very important component, which again utilizes logic, reasoning, hypothesis to make a determination of truth from falsehood. And that is what is called as Jain Nyaya. And then finally, there is Jain Adhyatma. Jain Adhyatma basically deals with the spirituality of Jainism, spirituality of how to uplift one's own conduct and the psychic manifestations that go along with it in order to achieve a higher state of spiritual existence. And thus, in the process, achieving what we call as Sambar, Nirjara, and ultimately Moksha. So that is the path that is laid out in Jain Adhyatma. So taken all of these five components together, this forms Jain epistemology. And why it's important to talk about this is because the topic that we are going to talk today, it is going to cut across all these five disciplines. Because Syadvad and Anekantvad, which we will also talk about, because it is both concepts are correlated and very important, they cut across all of these five things that we talked about. So with that in mind, let us talk about the concept of Anekantvad, because topic today is a Syadvad, right? Syadvad and Naya. But what is the role of a Syadvad Naya? In order to understand Syadvad and what Syadvad is going to do, we have to first talk about what is it that Syadvad is addressing in the Jain philosophy. And what Syadvad is addressing is basically the fundamental principle of Anekantvad, which is the non-absolutism. So it will not be an overstatement if I say this, that Jain Dharma cannot be understood and it cannot be explained without the principle of Anekantvad. Syadvad and Anekantvad are both are peculiar systems and a unique system of thought process within Jain Dharma. And our acharyas, the Purvacharyas, the Jaina thinkers, the logicians have placed tremendous level of importance on Anekantvad and on Syadvad. And there is a long list, right? There is Samant Bhadrachari who has wrote Atmimansa, who wrote Swayambhu Stotra. There is Akalankadeva who has written Swarup Sambodhan. Then there is Amrit Chandra Acharya who has written Purusharth Siddhupai, Panchastikai. Then there is Devsen Acharya who has written Alap Paddhati. Then there is Hemchandra Acharya who has written Syadvad Manjari. I mean, the list just goes on and on and on and on. And what is the main takeaway from all these contributions of our great learned acharyas is that Anekantvad and Syadvad is actually the heart of Jainism. We can say the soul of Jainism is ahimsa. And it will not be an overstatement if we say Anekantvad and Syadvad is the heart of Jain Dharma. So without understanding Anekantwad, we cannot really talk about Sadwad because Sadwad is addressed through Anekantwad. So let's get to it. What do we mean by Anekantwad? A thought process called non-absolutism, right? So when we talk about this, in the normal parlance, broadly speaking, Anekantwad basically means that we acknowledge and we respect the multiplicity of views that exist in this world. So this definition accepts that there should be a plurality of thought, right? There should be a plurality of thought in terms of arguments, theories, things that are presented. So while that definition is not incorrect, that definition is correct. But within Jain Dharma, the Anekantwas goes far beyond just the plurality of views. It is a very central tenet of Jain Dharma is understanding Anekantwad from the perspective of fundamental nature of reality. What is? That is the Vastu Tattva. So the Vastu Tattva itself, or the fundamental nature of reality, cannot be understood without employing Anekantwad. So that's why we have that the nature of reality is very complex and it is multidimensional. The truth, in order to analyze, accept, and understand, has to be looked at from number of perspectives, from the number of sides. You look at the legal system of jurisprudence. There are two sides arguing about the right and the wrong and the truth and the untruth, right? And the judge has to sit there and listen to both sides in order to arrive at truth in terms of what is presented. So similarly, here also, from the Anekantwad perspective, in order to understand the nature of reality, we have to examine, we have to understand multi-dimensional nature of truth. And that goes beyond the plurality of objectives. That goes beyond the plurality of thought process. So what it says, it actually says that there are opposite properties that exist in a substance. We all know that this entire universe is pervaded by 6 universal substances, right? And there are 7 fundamental principles, and there are no padarthas. So all of these components within the universe that we have, Jain Dharma says, Jainism states that these substances have properties that may appear to be contradicting to each other. So how do we explain that? What do we mean by that? Well, I'm sure you may have heard the properties of the substances is both sat and asat, existence and non-existence at the same time. It is ekatva and anekatva, means one and the many at the same time. Then there is nityatva and anityatva, the permanence and impermanence at the same time. Then there is bhed and abhed, divisibility and indivisibility at the same time. So these things exist in substances at the same time that a lot of times does not allow us to see a substance or a thing in its whole totality, right? And that is why Anekantwas is very, very important. We know that in this universe, from that perspective, nothing actually stays constant. Everything is subject to change. And one of the key principles is within Tatvarth Sutra, Acharya Umaswami Dev says, Utpadave Dravya Yuktam Sat, one that is in existence, one that is a substance, they all are characterized by Utpad, origination, Vyay, decay, and Dravyatva, meaning permanence. And this is happening and subsisting with all substances at all the time. And they change with respect to substance, space, time, and condition. How do we understand this? Well, look at ourselves. We go through series of changes ourselves as human beings from the time we are born until the time of our death, right? So these are the changes that we witness ourselves at a very gross level. But do we know that beyond this gross level, at a minute level also, there are a lot of changes taking place within our own bodies, which is called in the Jain system, Karmana Sharira. So within that, there is a lot of changes that are taking place. So nothing stays permanent. Things are always changing. And this is happening to us while we cannot see it with our naked eyes. But these things are happening because the principle of origination, decay, and permanence apply to all things, all objects, everything in this universe. And because of this complexity in the system, Jainism says that the multiplicity of views is the only way that leads to the greater understanding of truth for all of us. And that is why there is a need for anekantvad. There is need for non-absolutism. Right? Now, having understood the non-absolutism at a certain level, now we have to understand what has non-absolutism to do with Syadvada. Right? So here is the thing. Syadvad, what it is trying to do, it is trying to express Anekantvad. The principle of Anekantvad is expressed through a medium, through a process called Syadvad. So it is nothing but an expression of Anekantvad using certain terms and things within Jain Dharma. So what is it? It is an art of relative predication. Some scholars have also used the term conditional predication. It is also okay, but conditional sometimes might imply and give person a wrong idea that what you are talking about is conditioned or dependent on something. It is really not dependent. You are articulating a viewpoint based on a certain standpoint. So that is why it is a relative predication. So stating the truth relative to something from a particular standpoint, that is what we mean by Sadhvat. So how do we understand that? Well, let us take the example of Bhagavan Ramchandra. In Jaina, according to Jainas, he has achieved a Siddhatva. In other schools of thought, he is worshipped as Paramatma, as a god as well. Now, in order to understand Bhagavan Ram, we have to not look at only Bhagavan Ram as only a son, as a king. But Bhagavan Ram was a king, was husband, was a brother, was a son, and these are number of multiple roles that Bhagavan Ramchandra played in his life. So in order to understand his true personality, we have to look at it from all angles and from all perspectives. And this is where the Sadhvad comes into the picture and says, it's the art of exposition of multiple nature of reality without contradicting the opposite principles or viewpoints that might exist. So for example, Sat and Asat both can stand at the same time. Nitya and Anitya can both stand at the same time. We are Nitya from the perspective of our true existence, from the perspective of the soul, but at the same time, from the perspective of the decay, one day this body is going to go. So these modifications are going to change. So this Nityatva and Anityatva both are also subsisting at the same time. So by doing this, what Sadhvada does is Sadhvada offers a relative predication, a relative statement from a particular standpoint that highlights one aspect of the reality. In doing so, it refutes the absolutism and it espouses relativism. Relativism is not the whole truth, but relativism is part of the truth. And that is what Sadhvad is trying to articulate. That is what Sadhvad is trying to get at. Now we believe, our logicians, our acharyas said, that absolute unqualified affirmation is not in conformity with the nature of reality, right? This is where acharyas have refuted and gone against the ekanta, because absolute unqualified affirmation leads to ekant, to absolutism, and we don't believe in absolutism. At the same time, absolute unqualified negation is also not in conformity with the nature of reality. So both coexist together, and in order to recognize the nature of reality, both have to see it from all the perspectives. So there is no absolute here. How do we see it? Let's take another example. There is a glass kept in the room, and that glass is half filled with water. So one person might say the glass is half empty. The other person might say the glass is half full. Well, who is right and who is wrong? Both are right from the perspective from which they are looking at. One person is looking at it from the perspective that it is half full, and one person is looking at it as half empty. So neither is wrong. Both are correct from the perspective from which they are looking at. And that is why Syadvada emphasizes the aspects of the truth in a way that it does not negate the truths that other people or other things may say, but it assigns the primary and the secondary status for the objects in question. Meaning, going back to the example of Ramchandra, when Ramchandra is being talked as a king, right? And when he is being a just king and he's conducting the affairs of his kingdom, at that time his role as a son, as a brother, will be secondary. And his role as a king will be primary. But when he retires to his quarters, right, and starts mingling with his friends and families, now his role as a son, as a husband, as a brother will be primary, but his other role will be secondary. See, in this way, the truth does not get distorted, right? But it is given a proper place in its perspective from which it is analyzed. And that is what essentially the doctrine of Syadvad means. If you look at the Jain texts and if you go through the definitions, you will probably get a fit reading through those definitions. You may not understand because there are a lot of esoteric words that are used to describe this. But in essence, this is what Syadvad is. It is the art of relative predication. Okay? So I think so far, I think we are doing okay on the time here. Now, advancing this further, what does actually the word Syadvada means and how it is achieved, right? So in this slide, you see that Syadvad is made up of basically two terms, Syat and Vad. And Syadvad, Syat and Vad, when it is combined, it leads to Syadvada. Vad basically means a process of narration, statement slash exposition. That is what the word Vad means. And then the word Sat, right? And this is where other schools of thoughts have run into a little bit of trouble in understanding this doctrine with this one word, Sat. A lot of people have misinterpreted and misunderstood the word Sat, meaning as perhaps, possible, somehow, or probable. This is what some people have misunderstood the wording of Sat to be. But actually, Sat means, in Hindi, it means Kathanchita. Kathanchit does not mean perhaps. Kathanchit does not mean Kadachit. Kathanchit means from a certain perspective. Kathanchit means from the perspective from which it is being communicated. So what the word Sat means, Sat literally means a relative standpoint. A statement made from the relative standpoint is what you get as a predication, and that is a Syadvad. Now this Syadvad, right? how is Syadvad achieved? Meaning, how is Syadvad stated? Syadvad is stated through what is called as sevenfold predication. The Jain term for that is called Saptabhanga. Saptabhang means sevenfold predications through which Syadvad is achieved, and by taking the help of Nayas. Because at the end of the day, what Syadvad is going to articulate, what Syadvad is going to say, is it is going to articulate a particular viewpoint, and that particular viewpoint is going to come from a Naya, which we will look into a little bit later. Right? So hence this word Syadvad is justified only when, this is really important to understand, if this whole statement is without the word Syad, then it is not a Syadvad. So Syad becomes very important because it gives it the character of relativism because of the word Syad in it. So a person who is using this is saying that, hey, I may not understand the complete reality, but from certain perspective, I am communicating the reality, and this is what it is, right? And that reality is always communicated from the perspective of, if you look to the right of the slide, with respect to substance, space, time, and condition. In other words, this is said as Dravya, Kshetra, Kala, and Bhava. So each substances have their each Dravya, Kshetra, Kal, and Bhav. They have their own substance, space, time, and condition. They all have that. And this is the one way hang on here. So this is the one way in which the Syadvada is stated is with respect to these four elements. Now let us go through these sevenfold predications, meaning the sevenfold statements that are made, right? Each one of them is preceded by the word Syad, right? So first one is Syad Asti. Now some people in their analysis and in their books have used the word probably or have used the word somehow. The right word to use is relatively, not probably, not somehow, because that indicates some level of uncertainty. And there is no uncertainty in this. The truth is correct from the perspective from which it is stated. That is why it is relative. So Sat Asti means relatively a thing is, means a thing exists. That is Sat Asti. Syad Nasti means relatively speaking, a thing is not. A thing does not exist. Now, how can one say if the thing exists and the thing does not exist? Well, you look at it from the perspective, it all depends on how you are looking at it. Each substance, when it is looked from its own substance, time, space, and condition, it is in existence. But when it is looked from the perspective of the other substance, it does not exist. For example, simple example, I am wearing this ring, this golden ring. So I can say this ring is made up of gold, Sat Asti, and it is not made up of silver, Nasti. So Nasti Dharma and Asti Dharma is present in everything, such as in this simple example. Same thing, the next one is called Syad Astinasti. Now they are combining both of them and saying Astinasti, meaning that relatively speaking, a thing is and thing is not. Means it is present and it is not present as well. A thing is and is not. So if you combine the two from my previous example, you will get that statement. And that is also quite possible. The fourth one we have is called Syad Avyaktavya. What does Avaktavya mean? One that is indescribable. Syad avaktavya. From certain perspective, relatively speaking, something could be unexplained, indescribable. And why that is? Because see, Asti Dharma and the Nasti Dharma are presented in a substance, but they cannot be spoken of at the same time. They have to be followed by some form of an order, and they cannot be communicated at the same exact sentence, same exact moment. And from that perspective, one can make an argument that the substance that you are talking about is indescribable. Then we have the next one, Syad Asti Avaktavya. Relatively speaking, the thing is there, and yet it is indescribable. Then there is Syad Nasti Avaktavya. Relatively speaking, the thing is not, but it is indescribable. See, some people who have been looking at this for the very first time, it might get a little complicated to understand this. One has to go through this with a peace of mind, read it a few more times, and try to reflect upon it, right? And then it becomes easier to digest these concepts. And again, all of them are there to make sure that the nature of reality that is multidimensional is conveyed here, and the truth is analyzed from all perspectives. Then the last one here is Syad Asti Nasti Avaktavya. Relatively speaking, a thing is not, and yet it cannot be described. Right? So this is how the Syadvad is communicated through Saptabhanga. Now, this might be a lot to just take in all of these statements and feel easily confused. But let us take a quick, simple example, right? And that example is, if somebody approaches to you and comes to you and say, "Are you knowledgeable? Kya aap jnani hain? Are you knowledgeable?" One might say, "Syad asti." Yes, relatively speaking, from certain perspective, I am knowledgeable. And that person might say, relatively speaking, I am not knowledgeable. I am knowledgeable about the things that I know, but with respect to a lot of other things that are in this world, a lot of disciplines, professions, a lot of things, areas, I am not. And from that perspective, I am ignorant. I am not knowledgeable. Or that person might say, relatively speaking, I am knowledgeable in certain respect, and I am not knowledgeable in certain other respect. That's sad astinasti right there. Then there is sad avaktavya. Or one might say, the area that you are talking about, I may not know about it, and that is why whether I am able to help you or not, I don't know. So it is indescribable. That is sad avaktavya. Then there is a fifth one, sad asti avaktavya. Well, you might say, actually, I am knowledgeable in some area, but maybe I cannot say for sure whether I am knowledgeable in other areas. That is avaktavya. It is and it is not at the same time. So this way, see, you can see the Jaina acharyas have given the logic, have given the tarka, have given these arguments to understand the nature of reality. And realistically speaking, if we look at these sevenfold predications that we have, if one looks at them with a finer understanding, there are really three that are the key predications. Number one, number two, and number four. Sad Asti, Sad Nasti, and Sad Avaktavya are the three ones. The rest of the four are derived from the combination of the three. So this is also another way to look at the Syadvada. Okay, so I hope I'm making sense here. I hope that this is not too complex to understand. Now let us go through. Now that we have talked about Anekantvad, Syadvad, now we have to make a connection of that with Nayas, right? And in order to understand the Nayas, we have to know what is called as Praman. These are very important concepts. People may have heard the term Nayas, and people may not have heard the other term, which is the Pramana. So, Pramanas are important because Nayas come from Praman. And what Praman is basically it is the standard of knowledge. Standard of knowledge, as in, it is the rational knowledge, Samyak Jnana. Samyak Jnana is considered as a Pramana within Jain philosophy. So, by that definition, whatever Nayas are emerging from Pramana, they have to be also part of rational knowledge, Samyak Jnana. And because Pramana takes into account the full nature of reality, complete knowledge, complete information relative to Nayas, because Nayas will only talk about one aspect. So Pramanas from that perspective is considered a standard of knowledge, a full standard of knowledge. And that usually comes from acquiring the state of rational knowledge. And because it includes number of components, it also denotes non-absolutism. Because Nayas, we'll talk about later, Nayas represent one aspect of reality, but Pramanas will reflect everything in it. And one aspect of that Pramana, when it is stated, that becomes Naya. Hence, we are saying that Pramana is the non-absolutism part because it includes the whole sum in it. Now, the Pramanas we know to be are the 5 types of knowledges. Now, all those 5 types of knowledges, which is sensory based knowledge, scriptural based knowledge, clairvoyance knowledge, mind reading knowledge, and perfect knowledge. 5 knowledges. All of these 5 knowledges are considered standards of knowledge, and hence they are considered pramana. With the omniscient level knowledge, which is the Kevala Jnana, being the most perfect part of pramana jnana. And from these pramanas emerge nayas. And these nayas are called standpoints. Standpoints, as in, again, relatively speaking, something being told from particular standpoints. So that is why they are subset of pramana, standard of knowledge. Now, this other distinction is quite important. Nayas only apply to scriptural based knowledge within the 5 knowledges that we talked about, right? Sensory based knowledge. Then there is clairvoyant knowledge, mind reading knowledge, and there is omnipotent knowledge, omnipresent knowledge, omniscient knowledge. In that, mind you, there are no nayas there. There is only praman jnana that exists. So when we talk about nayas, we talk necessarily about scriptural based understanding of nature of reality. And that is where these nayas are derived. That is why we say they only apply to scriptural based knowledge, meaning nayas are part of a Shruta Jnana only. And that is why, because they are derived from the Pramana, they are rational knowledge. And very importantly now, Nayas act as a tool for expression of Syadvada. So the Saptabhangi that we talked about, the 7 relative predications that we just went through, they are expressed using the Naya. So Nayas are used as tools to express Syadvad, and Syadvad in turn expresses Anekantvad. So thus, Anekantvad, Praman, and Syadvad and Naya are all related in this way. And this forms the basis of non-absolutism. What is it? The Nayas. The Nayas form as a basis of non-absolutism because they are articulating partial truth. Now, how do Nayas play this role? As we said, Nayas are the standpoints that articulate a specific viewpoint from a certain perspective. So, for example, when Nayas are being talked about, soul will be analyzed and looked at it. So, from the Vyavhara standpoint, soul will be said, a jiva is a jiva when it contains 10 vitalities. When 10 vitalities are present, it is a jiva. Now, that is from a certain specific perspective, soul has been defined. Now, from the perspective of the real or the absolute, the definition of the soul or the jiva will change. So that is why the understanding of Naya becomes paramount and important. Now, because Nayas are part of Pramana, they are inherently incomplete. Okay, they are stating the partial nature of reality from their own perspective. They are not meant to be complete. But when taken as a whole, they provide a whole picture. They are believable and they are good and they tell us the nature of reality because they derive their legitimacy from pramana, from the standards of knowledge. And Syadvada is used and Nayas are used by the Syadvada to talk about the differentiated nature of reality. Now, one might say, can certain Nayas be good or bad? Is it possible that some Nayas are good Nayas and some are bad Nayas? Well, that is also possible. A good Nayas are called as Sunayas. Sunayas means ones, those who state the nature of reality when it is in consonance with other viewpoints. When other viewpoints are disregarded, other viewpoints, there is an indifference to other viewpoints, then those Nayas are called false Nayas. They are referred to as Durnaya. So, in order to make sure that Naya is a good Naya, good as in it helps us understanding the nature of reality, it has to be always in consonance with other viewpoints. Meaning, Vyavahar goes with Nishchay, Nishchay goes with Vyavahar, Dravyarthik Naya goes with Paryayarthik Naya, Paryayarthik Naya goes with Dravyarthik Naya. So when it is all taken together, then we can say these Nayas are sound fundamentally and they can tell us the nature of reality. Okay? So this is how the Nayas play a role into Syadvada. Now the last part, I believe I have still 5 minutes, I think, Pandeji.
Uh, yes, if you are going to conclude it in 5 minutes, it's okay.
Yeah. Okay. So this is the last slide that I have here, and I shall run through this very quickly in the interest of time. And this is meant to provide an bird's eye view of various Nayas are stated in the Jain philosophy. So basically, the way to look at it, Agamas compare Nayas as two eyes, two sets of two eyes. You need to have a right eye, you need to have a left eye. And when you use both eyes together, then you are properly able to project onto the site there you're looking at, and then you are properly able to understand what you are looking at and be able to grasp it. So the similarly here, Nayas broadly are classified into Agam Naya and Adhyatma Naya. Agam Nayas come from a philosophical standpoint, from the topic of Siddhanta. And the spiritual Naya are called the Adhyatma Naya. Now, within philosophical Agam Naya, there is Dravyarthik Naya and there is a Paryayarthik Naya, which is the substance-based Nayas, and there is modification-based Nayas. Now, very quickly, uh, I was going to walk through each one of these, but we don't have time for it. So I'll just state at a very broad level. Dravyarthik Nayas basically are meant to espouse, communicate, and articulate a substance from the perspective of the substance itself without looking at its modes, verifications, transformations, and changes. So when Naya is talking about only the Dravya, that becomes the Dravyarthik Naya. It usually communicates what is considered a common knowledge, not a special knowledge. Because common knowledge will say that all jivas are equal, all jivas are endowed with certain kinds of capacities, such as darshan, gyan, charitra. So when these kind of statements are made, know that we are talking about the Dravyarthik Naya. And these Dravyarthik Nayas are further divided into three types from the Tattvarth Sutra: the Naigam Naya, Sangraha, Avyavahara. Each one of them, again, focuses on the substance itself and ignoring the modifications and the changes that are taking place in it. Again, all of this is meant to show how does the Vastu Swarupa works and what is our understanding of it and how we can remove the ignorance from what we have and how we can walk the path of knowledge. The second one is the Paryayarthika. Now, Paryayarthika, as the word itself says, this is the modification based Naya. Means it will not look at substance as a substance in itself, but it will look at its modifications, meaning the changes, the transformations that are taking place. And there are four Nayas like that they look into the transformation, which is the Rujasutra, the Shabda, Samabhiruda, and Evamruta. Okay, so these are the four ones that will look at the particular modifications, the present condition of the substance, and they will try to describe the reality from that perspective. So that is Paryayarthi. Now, moving on to the Adhyatma side, a lot of people may know that Adhyatma basically has two Nayas, Vyavhar Naya and the Nischay Naya. Vyavhar can be called as a practical Naya, and Nischay can be termed as absolute Naya or the real Naya. Okay. And what Vyavhara does is basically Vyavhar relies on two objects or the two substances to communicate the story. And whereas Nishchaya only depends on one object, one substance, and taking that one substance into consideration, and by removing all the impurities that contained in it, it only talks about that substance. And that is called the Nishchaya. And the Vyavhara, meaning it talks about the modifications and the things that are happening. So there are three categories of that, Sadbhut, Asadbhut, and Upcharit, which give you different perspective of how to look at the modifications and how to look at the different standpoint. So for example, just to quickly give you an example, if somebody says, this boy is like a lion, this boy is, in order to communicate the bravery or valiance of the boy, we say he is like a lion. So what we are saying, we are establishing the qualities of the lion into that boy, and we are communicating. That is an example of Vyavahar Naya. So when you say, this is my body, this is my house, this is my son, all these statements, they are all made from the practical viewpoint, Vyavahar Naya. And from the Nishchay perspective, you talk about the soul's manifestations of pure and impure nature. That is called the Nishchay. So when we talk about soul, we say the soul is endowed with knowledge, with conation, with virya, with ananda. That we are all talking about Nishchay. We are not mingling body and the soul together, but we are only talking about the soul. That is Nishchay. In summary, all of these Nayas are important. Okay, if these were not important, they would not have found a place for themselves in Jain Agama. And all of them taken together tell us what is the nature of reality and how we should understand it, comprehend it, so we are on the path of knowledge. So I think that's where we are here. I will end my presentation by giving this quote from this English author, Arnold Bennett. He says here that there can be no knowledge without emotion. We may be aware of a truth, but yet until we have felt its worth, it's not ours. To the cognition of the brain must be added the experience of the soul. I think what this author is trying to say is that we can read all the Shastras, all the knowledge, all everything that is available to us. But until we have understood it, internalized it, and have realized the truth behind it, the truth cannot be ours. Right? So it's a very, very fundamentally important statement. So I just leave that as a takeaway for the audience here. And with that, I think I come to the end of my presentation here. So thank you for bearing with me. I hope I was able to communicate here in terms of the importance of the Syadvada, the Naya, the Pramana, and the Anekantva. So I will give it back to Pandeyji to see if there are any questions, if there's any Q&As we want to do.
Thank you very much, Mr. Khot. for this simple talk on Syadvad and Saptabhanga. If there are any questions, I would request the audience to kindly raise their hands and they can also unmute themselves.
Should I stop sharing the screen?
Yes, please. Is there any comment? Shubhanji is raising his hand.
Mr. Khot, thank you very much. I felt I'm sitting in a university class, revisiting my knowledge of Naya and, Syadvad and Ekantvad. Lot of things which I took for granted became clear, and I could relate to some of the statements I made on this subject. So I thank you for increasing my clarity on the subject.
Thank you, sir.
Yes,
It's not-
Yogendraji, yes.
It's not an easy subject. It's not an easy topic to deal and understand. It takes a while, to get to the nature.
Excellent
Yogendraji.
presentation, Dharmaraj. Yes, can you hear me? Excellent
Yes, we can.
presentation. Thank you so much. Just a quick question, and we can take it offline also if that's better. In Jainism, we obviously have to have faith in scriptures and Mahavir's Vani. How does that relate to these concepts of Anekantvad? And obviously, do we consider Mahavir's Vani as the primary view and others as secondary and tertiary and not applicable, especially in the modern context where the knowledge is so much wider and deeper than perhaps espoused in the scriptures?
Yeah. So two things there. Mahavir's Vani or the any Tirthankara's Vani is a guidepost for all of us to follow. The Tirthankaras, the Shrut the Kevalis have realized the truth for themselves and they have communicated that truth to their disciples, right? We have to make it as our own truth. And that is where the knowledge of Jain Dharma comes into the picture. The knowledge of scriptural based study comes into the picture. And we need to dive into that knowledge base to understand what has been communicated by our acharyas, by the Tirthankaras, and what do we regard in our daily life as we go about living our lives, and what we think about how we should conduct ourselves in a way that we are actually making a progress towards self realization, progress towards self improvement. That is where these Nayas, Anekantvada, Syadvada, they all come into the picture. The source of this knowledge is Kevali, Shrut Kevali, the Acharyas, and Bhagwan Mahavir, being the last code maker, last Tirthankara. But since that, they have given us a body of knowledge because the truth that they realized, that belongs to them. Taking this knowledge, we need to realize our truth by taking this and applying it and then understanding how we can conduct ourselves. So that is how we should view this. And there are obviously practical applications of Anekantvad in today's world that is riddled with conflict and violence and a lot of polarization everywhere. That is the practical aspect of Anekantvad that Jainism can transport to other schools of thought, to other people, to listen to others. And that is the practical application. But beyond that, there is a spiritual application. And that application comes from the spiritual, from the scripture.
Thank you so much, Yogendraji, and thank you so much, Mr. Khot.
Pragyaji, please invite our chair.
All right.
Yeah.
So it's time for us to listen to the comments and the views of our chairperson, Professor Dharamchandji.
Thank you, Pragya ji. First of all, I want to congratulate ISJS for organizing such lectures for enriching knowledge of curious persons. And I also want to congratulate Dharmaraj ji Khot for explaining Syadvada and Nayas in a very simple way. He, in the beginning, explained 5 components of Jain epistemology. But I think epistemology is related to knowledge, system of knowledge, how to know, what are the means of knowing, who is the knower, what is the knowable. These all aspects are discussed in epistemology. So knowledge is in the center of epistemology, and there are 2 means in Jainism for knowing. The first one is Praman, and the second is Naya. Praman Naya Radhigama, as it has been told by Umaswati or Umaswami in Tattvartha Sutra. So Praman and Naya, these both are the components of Jain epistemology. We may consider knowledge also, 5 types of knowledge also as a part of Jain epistemology. Mati Gyan, Shruti Gyan, Avdhi Gyan, Manaparya Gyan, and Keval Gyan. All these 5 knowledges are the components of or the parts of or aspects of Jain epistemology. And we divide these 5 knowledges into 2 pramanas, Pratyaksha and Paroksha. In the Tattvar Sutra, Pratyaksh pramanas are Avadhi Gyan, Manaparya Gyan, and Keval Gyan. And the Paroksh pramanas are Mati Gyan and Shruti Gyan. But in the later period, we see that our acharyas like Siddha Sen Divakar and Bhatt Akalanka extended these types. And Bhatt Akalanka propounds that perception or pratyaksha praman is of 2 types, samvyavarik and paramarthik, which is paramarthik. It includes Avdhi Gyan, Manaparya Gyan, and Keval Gyan. And the samvyavarik perception includes Mati Gyan, but especially Mati Gyan, which is occurred through sense organs. That is sense organs and mind that comes into category of perception. And the paramarthik perception is Avdhi Gyan, Manaparya Gyan, and Keval Gyan. And Paroksh Praman is divided into 5 types. That is Prati, recollection, Prativigyan, recognition, Tarka, reasoning, Anuman, inference, and Agama, that is testimony. So there are 5 types of Paroksha Pramana. So all these Pramanas, Paroksha and Pratyaksh, are the means to know rightly knowing. So rightly knowing, these Pramanas are mentioned by Jain logicians. They came into dialogue with other philosophers of Naya, Vaisheshik philosophy, of Buddhist philosophy, on Mimamsa philosophy, and they gave their arguments to establish these pramanas in a very logical way. So we have to understand, we have to learn these all pramanas for enrichment of our knowledge, and for knowing the system of epistemology, how it developed in Jainism, in Jain philosophy. There are three things are to be discussed in this lecture. The first one is the epistemological aspect, and that includes pramanas and nayas. And the other one is ontological aspect, that is metaphysics. It defines anekant. Every real thing is anekantatmak, and it has multiple attributes or dharmaj, and contradictory attributes also. The Jain acharyas propound that every real thing has contradictory attributes also, and this contradiction removes when we use nayas, when we use dravyarthik naya or paryarthik naya, then this contradiction disappears. So this is the way of Jain philosophers, that they established nayas for understanding anekanta, the real entity, real thing. If we see the loka, universe, then everything is in its form, but every philosopher or every philosophy defines it in a different way. Vedantins define it as a Brahma, as a part of Brahma. Buddhists define it as a kshanik. Nayayikas define it as sat, and we also define it as a sat, utpad vedhruyuktam sat. So everything in itself is real, and it has many aspects. Jain philosophers explore it and place in front of us, that we should understand the real concept of real thing, real concept of every entity. So anekanta defines the entity or real thing which is anekantatmak. It bears anekantatmak. Anek is many, and ant is dharma. Anek dharma, and these anek dharma may be opposite dharmas, and like nitya, anitya, bhav, abhav, sat, asat, or ek, anek, expressible or inexpressible. So there is appears opposition, but Jaina intellectual removes this contradiction, this opposition, and present the real nature of things or reality. So anekant is anekant. From anekant drishti, we can know the nature of every thing, every entity. The other aspect of Jainism is to be discussed through Syadvada, and Syadvada is a aspect of language, how to speak, how to express that our sentence or our speech may be defectless. So Syadvada is a style of expression of defectless expression, without any defect, without any dosh. Nirdosh Kathan, we can make a Nirdosh Kathan, defectless statement. For that, Syadvada has been evolved by Jain philosophers, and it has been mentioned in Agamas also. In Bhagavati Sutra, we see the use of siya which has been used for sat. So Syat is not a perhaps is not possibility. It denotes not possibility, but it denotes the certainty, as Dharmaraj Khot also explained it. So Syadvada is a style of expression, as a right expression, style of right expression. Syadvad and Nayas have been expressed by Dharmaraj Khot. I congratulate him, and we should also know that from the beginning of canonical literature, we see Nayas. Naya is a original contribution of Jain philosophy in the field of philosophy. It is a unique contribution of Jainism, and Naya can be used at two places. The first one is for knowing, and the another is for statement, for expression. So Nayas can be used for knowing and for expression at both places. When we know the things properly, then we use Naya, and when we express the things properly, then we use Naya with word Syat, and using word Syat, it is called Syadvad. So all Nayas express their defectless content using Syadvad. Syadvad is a style of expression only, and it is also a peculiarity of Jainism that it uses this word for avoiding all defects, all doubts, and all uncertainties. So it is also a very good principle of Jainism, Syadvad, and there is Samantabhadra explains that there is a similarity between Keval Gyan and Syadvad. Keval Gyan is a pure and perfect knowledge, and Syadvad is a paroksh, not direct knowledge, indirect knowledge. Paroksh is indirect knowledge. But there, Syadvad has been told for Shruti Gyan. So, in the literature, we see that Nayas are considered as a part of Shruti Gyan. Nayas are considered as a part of Shruti Gyan. But in behavior, we see that Nayas are also the part of Mati Gyan. We know the things and we express the things in that way. So there is a vast and wide platform for discussion of Nayas and Syadvad, and these are the components of knowing. And one concept has been also mentioned by Jain Acharyas, Nikshepa. Nikshepa also defines the real meaning of a word. It is restricted up to defining a word, but Naya completely defines a sentence, what a sentence wants to say. So from Naya, we can know and we can express, and through expression, through Nikshepa, we can know the real meaning of a word. So there are some comments by me as observation, and it was a very good talk by Dharmaraj Khot. We learned many things. I thank him and all the organizers, including Srinatra Pandeji and Pragyaji and Suganji also.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Professor Jain. Now I would request our President, Dr. Shugan Jain, to present the vote of thanks.
Thank you very much, Pragyaji. I am really honored to be with Shri Dharmaraj ji, and it takes me back to about 10-12 years ago when I first met him in Boston during my stay there for a Dashlakshan Parv. And he was, I think, at that time getting interested in Jain philosophy. We used to have discussions. And then when I came to know that he has, relocated to Pune, I felt very happy, and I met him several times and tried to involve him in ISJ's activities. So Dharmaraj, you are a family for us. And I am really impressed by your growing, interest in Jain philosophy. And I think like your pedigree, like Padmanabh Jaini and others coming from that place and coming back to Pune to be in the area is an indication of the things to come in future. On the subject, I was very happy to hear your relationship to the four aspects: the Swabhav and the Kal, Kshetra, and Bhav. So, and with this, I feel when Yogendraji was asking a question from the Agamas, I remembered the question by Gautam when he asked Bhagwan that Lord, is cosmos infinite and without beginning? So then Bhagwan Mahavir answered him that from substance point of view, it is without a beginning and without an end. From a place point of view, Kshetra point of view, it is limited. Like this, so he talked of all those aspects and never spoke of just one to say, yes, it is, beginningless or other things. So my thinking that has maybe changing today is then when somebody is, like Keval Jnani, he may not use the word Syat, but he may use these different four things. And when we common people who do not have perfect knowledge, then we use the word Syat. So that is my learning today. Thank you very much. And please stay in touch and continue to enrich us with your increasing knowledge. Thank you very much, Dharmaraj.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for your kind words, especially Shuganji. I have cherished our meetings in Boston. I have cherished our meetings here also whenever you have come. So thank you, and we will definitely be in touch. And ISJS has been doing a just incredible job in propagating Jain Dharma across the place world, and more importantly in the US and other parts. So we have these great concepts and we have these great theories. It would be sad if it just remained just with Jain people. So that's where ISJS and your leadership and your vision has come into picture, where this is being transmitted to people all over the world. So that is a wonderful thing, and I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Shuganji. And thank you, Mr. Khot, Professor Dharamchandji. We have Suletji. We have so many of you. I would just say that this was just the 16th lecture. Stay tuned for the 17th lecture. And it was a wonderful, wonderful time today. Thank you so much. Jai Jinendra.
Jai Jinendra.